So yeah, so this is from Hedwig's theme, and it's inspired. I think that's wrong, actually. It should say, hold on, first mistake. Okay, 184 to 193 is what it should say there. So let me fix that. Sorry about this. 184 to 193. Okay, and so I went and I transcribed that section, and I transcribed many bars before that in the piece, right? But I just went through and analyzed this section specifically because I found it interesting, and we're going to see what I did here. So let me actually pull up the document. I was watching something there, don't mind me. I might also do a video on the Odyssey score. I know I'm a bit late to that, but I might take a look and see what they did if that's possible. So this is what I put down here. So what I put down primarily is he used a sequence. Okay, so these are techniques he used to create this section here, and let me actually pull it up so you can see it. So yeah, this is the section we're working with here, just so you can see it visually. So I'm not going to play the whole thing because it is copyright, but you can see he has these little rhythmic ideas. He has a double ostinato right here. He has a melody, he has harmony, and that's pretty much it for the whole phrase. And then beforehand, this is kind of like a developmental section. That's why I put that there, because he's just emphasizing the tonal center, and he's adding in like different layers to build tension, and he has this trill here as well, and it's just kind of building into this section. Like the whole purpose of this 3-bar section here is honestly to just build into this section starting at 187. So you start to internalize this. This is why I'd recommend score transcription, because you start to develop an intuition, and you don't have to think so much about every little thing that you're doing, and it helps you just compose more naturally, and you're able to express your ideas more effectively because you don't have to think so much about every little thing that you're doing. I'm not thinking about, oh, I have to put the ostinato on this beat because this instrument can't, it's just instinctual. You don't have to constantly think about everything, and that's why I'd recommend this process. And I think this new series that we're doing here with Hedwig's theme, and we can of course move on to other pieces, but I think this series in particular is a lot more effective than the last series, because you can actually go in, and again, you'll have to do the work yourself. I can't make you do this, but if there's one thing you take away, is that if you do this process and you actually, now I'm not saying you'll sound better than the composer, that comes with experience, but you can get pretty close to that sound that you're trying to get by simply transcribing and then going through that analysis process that I covered in previous videos. So yeah, hopefully, I mean, you should have an idea of what he did here. I can go through the sheet. So I put down he had a sequence. So he was sequencing the melody here. This is the melodic line, and he was, yeah, just going up in different intervals. And it's the same melody, the same thematic material, but he's just using it in different ways. So he's not coming up with new ideas. He's just creating variation on what he already did. And so that's another thing to keep in mind, is you don't have to always come up with new ideas, and you learn this. It becomes intuitive. Like you don't have to say this to yourself and remind yourself this. It just becomes a habit because you're transcribing the music, and you realize this, and it's a technique that you can just use whenever necessary, right? So another reason to follow this process. I put he had rhythmic variation, so you can see that this rhythmic, this is what I'd call a rhythmic idea. It's not really an ostinato because it's not present throughout the whole measure or throughout the whole phrase, but it appears periodically, and so it's on different beats every time. He doesn't always do it on the same beat. You can see here he does it the same beat, but it's still different because he uses different notes. And then I think, does he go back? No, this is different notes too. So he keeps it familiar, but it's different each time though, in some way. Maybe it's a different rhythm, maybe it's on a different beat in the measure, you know, he'll change it up. But he tries to keep it familiar, but also a variation to spark interest, keep the listener engaged. So yeah, he has the rhythmic idea here, continues it in the bass. He has harmonic changes, so you can see the harmony changes. Generally it's moving up a minor third, but he does jump up a tritone somewhere in here. And then he has chromatic shifts, right? So we're going outside of the key signature. We're not just switching chords, we're switching tonal centers temporarily, but then he does eventually come back. So I believe he started off in the key of D, and then he ventured off into different keys, and then he came back to the key of D. So that's another thing he does. And then obviously there's layering. And I'm not going to show you the sheet fully, just because if you want it, just let me know and I can see what I can do. I can probably give a download link or something, but I don't want to just share it unless people actually want it, you know. And so I'm just going through this sheet and looking at what I put down. Then I put the density increases. So as we progress through the phrase, there's new layers that are added. Specifically towards the end, the chords, there's more notes in this chord here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, there's a density increase. We also have a new layer added here with the harp glissando, right? So new layers are added, and we're also having a crescendo. So the intended effect obviously is to build here in these last two bars. So for the harmony, we have the melody. As you can see, melody. We have a bass line, which is more present towards the end of the phrase. It's clearly a bass line, but you could, argue. This is the bass. It's just a rhythmic fragment, so it still counts as the bass. We have harmony, of course, in the form of chords, because these are basically highlighting. So this ostinato here is highlighting whatever tonal center we're in temporarily, right? That's what this ostinato is doing. And then there's another ostinato, and it's primarily highlighting chord tones, but that's more of a guideline, right? Because he probably... So this is in the key of A, right? Yeah, so we're in the key of A here. Does he ever branch outside of the chord tone? So that stays within A. Now we're in the key of C minor. So does he... Yeah, he uses primarily chord tones. So yeah, he's doing chord tones with one ostinato, and then he's just highlighting the general scale with another ostinato here. And the rhythms are separate from each other. They're not similar in rhythm. So that's kind of another layer he has. And he has the flourishes. That really comes in... Well, could you call this a flourish? I would call it more of a rhythmic element, because it feels more rhythmic. He continues it in the bass, right? It's kind of pushing the phrase forward, so I would call that more rhythmic. The flourishes, I would say, come in towards the end with the harp gliss. That's more of a flourish right there. And then he also has, right here, these are flourishes with the glissandos and the trill chords, right? So I would call those flourishes, as opposed to this is more rhythmic. And then I would say, yeah, rhythmic figure, that's what you would call this right here, is a rhythmic figure. So that's what I put down for layering. And then I described the phrase shape, so you can look at this and see, okay, so there's a statement. If we're starting in this measure, right, this is more of a developmental section, so there aren't too many rules to follow, because it's just developing and then you lead into the statement. It really just has to build, and you can do that with layering. As you can see, he does that quite easily here. So the statement, we have the statement, and then he sequences the statement. He sequences it again, going up minor thirds, and then we're back in the original key here. As you can see, that was A minor, back in A minor. And then these last two bars are just kind of building into what the next phrase is going to be. The melodic fragment, but modulates every bar to maintain interest. So yeah, I basically listed the two techniques that I wanted to use here. Then I did the composition exercise. And again, this can be changed and modified. That's another thing I realized going through many of his scores, is because there's so many layers, like each layer can be changed in various ways. Like there's so many, like this line here, there's so many different ways I could have did this, right? My advice is just do what comes to you in the moment. Obviously, if you want to change it later on, you can, but don't get too rigid and think that you have to do it a specific way, right? Do whatever comes to you, because when you're transcribing scores, you're kind of developing an internal kind of intuition, I would say, with what to do. If that makes sense. You're internalizing what the composer would actually do when you transcribe. So after, you do this enough times, once you feel confident enough, just do whatever you feel is necessary to get the desired effect. So if you're trying to build, add in another layer, right? If you're trying to, maybe you can add in some trill chords like I did here. And you just kind of, you start internalizing those specific techniques, and you start knowing when to use them and when to apply them. So this whole section here is just meant to build, right? And so then we land into this section here, and this is where the thematic material actually starts. It starts off here, and this is actually the first line that I wrote. I wrote the thematic material first. Obviously, after this part here. So I wrote this in, and then I just sequenced it up. I took the same idea of sequencing and I applied it here. I then sequenced it up another, well actually no, I think I stayed in the same key here. I just wanted to prolong it, and I also prolonged this bar because I wanted to add a rhythmic idea. That just came to mind, that felt like something Williams would do, because I was internalizing, how he was thinking by transcribing the score. So I added in my rhythmic idea, and in order for me to do that, I had to extend the measure to 12/8. So that's what I did. And so, just so you know why the time signature changes temporarily, we switch back to 9/8 to just continue with our idea here, which starts out in 9/8. So we're continuing with that similar idea. It's not exactly the same. So technically that's highlighting, it's highlighting the dominant chord. If you can hear it, if you have a good ear, you can hear the dominant chord in that. So yeah, it's like an implied dominant inside the melody itself, or the thematic material. And then the chord down here just stayed the same. I didn't want it to sound too like classical or tonal, so I didn't put the dominant chord inside the static chord structure here. I just left it highlighting, the tonal center, which is currently E. And then I used this. This is the sharp 4, because when we talk about the minor scale, we're including basically all the minor scales. I decided to use a little bit of the Hungarian minor, so I just included that in there, the sharp 4, just because I thought it sounded nice, right? And then we sequence up again to G minor, sorry, to G minor. And again, there is some Hungarian, you could say color to it, some Hungarian minor color, because there is a sharp 4 here. But then there's also the, wait. Yeah, so it has that Hungarian minor flavor to it in that measure there. And so this is where you might get confused. Why does it like switch here? Well, we maintain the motif, but we just change it up, right? We don't want it to be too predictable. That's another thing I noticed with Williams. He might start out with something familiar, and then at the end of the phrase, he might take those ideas and rework them to sound completely different, but it's still using the same motif, so it still sounds kind of familiar, but it sounds, but it maintains interest, right? Because it's reworked in a way to sound different. So we have the same, so the rhythmic idea of the dotted 8th note, 16th dotted 8th, is we maintain that idea, but we're just changing it up. We use it twice in a row here. And then we have this dotted 8th note, and then the 3 16th notes, switching it up at the end. And we're just taking that idea from this thematic line here. The dotted 8th note, 16th, 8th note. And again, it's the same rhythm here. We're just using that over and over, basically. And then the ending is just completely different. It's just a rhythmic idea, which technically, did we see that earlier? We saw that earlier. Right? And it's very similar to that. So at least the first part, right? The first part we saw the 8th note and the 4 16th notes. 4 16th notes, 8th note, 4 16th notes. So it's a similar rhythmic idea that we heard earlier. And again, how do you know how many layers to use? How do you know when to bring those layers in? You learn that through score transcription, and you just kind of internalize it, and you know what to bring in and when, right? So that's why I recommend this process. And then all the other lines, the bass line, there's a lot more that went into it, but that's the melodic line. The melodic line is honestly the hardest, because everything else is based around that, right? The chords provide harmonic stability, but there's still, like, there's some sus chords in here. I'm not always doing major minor chords. I'm using, sus2 and sus4 occasionally, maybe a diminished chord. Maybe I'm holding 2 notes on the chord and then I'm moving another note around to fit whatever the melody is playing, right? But the end result that we get, I can play it here, and then I'll play the orchestrated version. Let me actually load up Note Performer to make this easy. And let's see. Yeah, this is the exercise orchestrated. So I'll play the sketch just so you can see what it sounds like on its own, and then we'll see what it sounds like orchestrated. So here we go. So you can kind of tell, like, it starts out in one key and then it kind of wanders around and then it returns at the ending. You can just feel it. But it doesn't feel completely stable because we have all these layers moving around, but you can still feel a general sort of stability when we return in that last bar. So here it is. Here it is, the full orchestra here, and my orchestration is okay, I would say, not great, can be improved, but there are techniques you can use for learning that, and I can cover those in separate videos, so just let me know if you want to see that. So here we go. I'll play it for you. So let's start. And let me turn the volume up because it's already kind of quiet. Go. Yeah, please excuse the suspended symbol at the end. I didn't mean for it to... I don't know why it's doing that, actually. It's a tremolo here in this bar, and it should end here. I don't know why it did that, but... yeah, as you can see, it creates an interesting texture when you orchestrate it. And this orchestration, I'd say it's fairly close. It's not perfect, obviously, but it gets the idea across of what it would sound like, I would say.